Welcome to another episode of the So-Called Oreos podcast, the podcast where we discuss all the awkwardness, hardship, and hilarity that comes along with society labeling you white on the inside and black on the outside, also known as an Oreo. I am one of your co-hosts, Kia Swin, and I am here with
Amari Pollard.
Jemai Primes.
Dang. Today we have a very special guest with us. She is Kira West, a content creator, community cultivator, and the founder of By West. Her journey into wellness began with an adventurous spirit and an insatiable desire to travel. Kira was determined to find all the opportunities she could to experience the world. Her fearless spirit allowed her to travel the world, exploring 6 continents and over 40 countries, often solo. Kira's love of travel influenced her desire to investigate ways to seek balance in her life and to live most optimally. Her journey to seek and define balance was intertwined with Kira's desire to define for herself the meaning of wellness. Her experience led to focus on not only travel, but fitness and running. These then became the elements that defined Kira's idea of wellness. Kira wants to empower people to seek their own definitions of wellness while also making the space more inclusive. She firmly believes wellness is a right for all and not an exclusive privilege for some. Kira, thanks for joining us.
Yes, of course.
I hope I did your bio justice. Okay, so this podcast is all about having the label Oreo being placed on you and how it's been impacted the way you move around the world. So we have to ask, have you ever been called an Oreo?
All the time. And it's funny because I just chatted with my brother about this. He started college this fall, and I think, our parents have always spoken to us, especially my stepmom. She's an English major. And use like a variety of words and just like sometimes more complicated phrasing than we need. So I think that we just kind of adopted those because that's all that we really knew and didn't know that it was any different from what anyone else was doing. I think until someone used that word. I definitely got it more when I was younger than I do now. I think now as a professional, it's actually quite helpful. But it's definitely something that I've run into over the years.
So what inspired you to get into wellness and start creating your brand?
So my brand really started more in the travel space. I have always loved travel, but when I went to college, I really got creative with how I did that. So I went to Cornell and I wasn't able to study abroad, but I did a lot of work projects abroad. So I did a lot of consulting, volunteering, and working with social enterprises. And when I graduated, I was like, okay, well, all of a sudden that's going to end because I'm going to go into working. And in my mind, that was like the end of my travels. But I actually found that traveling helps me to create balance because I had gone from undergrad straight into working at a hotel, which was a lot more stressful than I thought it would be. So for me, being able to take a couple of days or a long weekend to go explore a new place really became, a part of what kept me going and how I filled up my cup. So as I moved forward, I began doing more within the fitness space. Personally, because I realized that it was just important for me to prioritize, and that became my kind of daily way of taking care of myself and carving out some time for me. So By K West as a brand just encompasses both under the umbrella of wellness. So I approach wellness really through a lens of travel and fitness for me personally, but I want to encourage women, especially women of color, to kind of like figure out whatever works for them from a wellness perspective and realize that, it doesn't have to be expensive or kind of this large scale idea. It can kind of be like the little things that you do to live more optimally every day.
Like, how can the industry as a whole, do you think, maybe become more inclusive? And how can that help those looking to either enter the industry or to just be a part of it from, I guess, like a viewership? How can that help them?
I think that the organization is really key. So there are 2 organizations that come to my mind, one within the travel space and one within the fitness space, that's really creating kind of more of an organized effort around advancement for Black people. So there's the Black Travel Alliance, which is a select few Black travel content creators, bloggers, and things like that that have come together to really hold the industry accountable, especially travel companies, tourism boards, and all of the folks that would fall under that sector. So I think being involved in that, being aware of what the efforts are there is kind of one way to continue to create space. And I think the organization is really key in terms of making long-term, large-scale shifts. And then if we look at the fitness end of things, Fit for Us, they were featured as a part of the Self Cover, which I was on in September, where we delved into what it means to be Black in fitness. And there's a lot more to come there in terms of, education, empowerment, and advancement for Black people that fall under the fitness and wellness scope. So I think that those are kind of the two things that I'm, somewhat involved in, more Fit for Us than I am with Black Travel Alliance, but I definitely am on the pulse of kind of like what's being done on both ends, and supporting and sharing the messaging and all of those things where I can as well. I think when it comes to collaboration, I always invite the opportunity to collaborate because I think it's really important. There are not a lot of Black women that are wellness bloggers, at least not necessarily on the scale that I'm operating on from like a business perspective. But I do make an effort to try and connect with people, kind of see where we can work together.
So before, you had mentioned being on the cover of Self magazine. Kudos to you. Celebrate. Pew, 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 pew.
Snaps.
If you haven't checked it out, go check it out. Listeners, support. So during the interview, you talked about kind of the intersection that music plays with fitness. Could you talk a little bit more about how music selections that some fitness instructors make can really put emotional strain on Black people?
Of course. So I think that the article probably does a better job than I'm about to do of distilling all the key points. But overall, as a Black person coming into a fitness class or a wellness space, you're looking for, that self-care moment. And so anything that's going to add additional stress or mental strain is just not ideal. And I think it can be quite jarring when you're in, a workout class and you're in the moment, really getting into it and enjoying yourself, to then hear the N-word and be the only Black person in the room that's then kind of stressed out about, like, is the instructor going to vibe with this? Are they going to repeat this? What is every other person in the room doing that maybe doesn't understand the history of the word and why it's just not something that we're perpetuating at this point. And obviously, again, like, I don't think that whether you're a Black instructor, a white instructor, an instructor from any other country in the world, that it makes a difference in terms of just creating inclusive environments. So, my kind of biggest thing with that was, why not just eliminate the challenge overall and like play more clean music, or just pay attention to and honor the fact that there's kind of a history there. I think the challenge within the fitness space sometimes is that Black music is appreciated, but Black culture and Black people aren't treated with the same level of value. And so the disconnect is quite stressful as well. I mean, there are entire brands that have built their following off of leveraging hip hop without respect to the history there, or without employing very many people of color, period. So, looking forward to kind of seeing more of that pivot and change, as we've already heard some of that start to shift.
So we're going to switch the conversation a little bit to more so like health and wellness and eating properly, but for many different reasons that boil down to like inequality and like issues of access and like food deserts. Poor eating tends to be a habit in the Black community. We see that especially like I can talk about like roots from the South and like just Southern eating and a lot of like butter and fried food and all that good stuff. But is there a way we can get some of our particularly older family members to eat healthy or eat healthier options? Because I feel like I struggle when it's especially like older family members who they'll just say like, I've been eating this for 50 years, I'm not going to change now. And I'm like, yeah, but you got to. So like, do you have any tips for that, how we can like shift that narrative to eating better?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't try and change all the things at once. So when I first started my wellness journey years ago, there was a book called Eat This, Not That, that just had like healthier swaps. So like instead of having, this is going to be a really bad example because I was going to go with double stuffed Oreos, have single stuff, but that's irrelevant. And also like, again, now I have Oreos on my mind and they are my favorite cookie. But the book was really easy to use because it was like, okay, if you usually buy like, I don't know, store-bought hot dogs, like here's a better option. And I think a lot of times it's like, I'm not expecting you to go from eating mac and cheese to having like just a salad. But at the same time, like, are there some things we can sub out? Like, can you have some balance somewhere else? And I think there's this common misconception that healthy food doesn't taste good. And I don't know about you ladies, but I like to season my food thoroughly, whether it's a vegetable or a piece of chicken or whatever. And I really had to learn now that I'm not just cooking for myself, but I'm cooking for someone who usually eats burgers and things like that, that like you do have to find a nice middle ground between, you know, some of the healthier options and then the things that are just like bring you joy and are enjoyable to eat. So like a lot of times we'll do turkey burgers versus beef burgers because those are a little bit better for you and a little bit cleaner and easier for your body to process. But like, can you really taste the difference? Not necessarily. It's still meaty, but yeah, I would say you can't try and change it all in one day. Like trying to make little sustainable changes, like can you cut down 1 can of soda a day and only do like, I don't know, a can a week or whatever it is, depending on kind of where that person's at. I feel like that's helped. And then also with like traditional recipes, again, like my family's kind of from the Caribbean. My aunt actually cooks pretty healthy and she makes everything from scratch and that's just how she moves. But I feel like when it comes to tradition and things like that, like those are not necessarily the things that I always jump to first in terms of like what I'm going to change, because I understand that there's like the history, like the feelings, the process, and like it's a whole thing. So I kind of focus more on the little things first to create kind of sustainable habits. So like water intake is usually pretty low in some of those types of folks that are older that maybe just don't pay attention.
I think it's interesting because you had said that, you know, obviously travel goes under the wellness umbrella. And I think in my mind, I had kept everything like so separate. Like I had never thought like how travel could actually help my sense of well-being. I always thought of that being like a luxury, but I think that's also just because I'm cheap. So I think that plays a part into it. But like, could you speak more on just like how being able to travel and experience other things helps you just personally?
Of course. So I feel like I could have a whole podcast episode just talking about that. But we'll try and distill it and be concise in my response, although that's not one of my strong suits. I think when it comes to my brand overall and why I use wellness as an umbrella word, I really struggled for a long time with which direction to go into. So I was running marathons, I was training for New York City, and people were asking me about my fitness content. I was getting more invested in like athleisure trends and that sort of stuff because I was just wearing it all the time. And so I started getting more questions there. And the travel hacks in terms of finding flight deals and making it work for my budget has been something that I've always loved. My stepmom was big on that when we were younger, like finding experiences and getting them for like the best price that we could kind of afford. So, you know, I came to a point where a friend of mine actually said, you know, you're spending all this time and energy on trying to decide which way to go, but why couldn't you do both? And I was like, I guess that's an interesting concept. I suppose I could do both. And then I thought more about it and it was like, well, really when I'm traveling or when I'm working out, it's about my me time and how I fill up my cup and care for myself and continue to grow as a person. So could I not, you know, explore wellness through these two things and just be kind of super clear with people on what that means. Mm-hmm. And that's how I made the correlation and that was born. I think from a personal standpoint, I didn't realize how important travel was to me until I went to college and I couldn't do it in the same way that I did when I was in like elementary school and had to kind of figure out how to get creative there. But then I realized how much it expanded my perspective. The first time that I went to Asia was when I went to Cambodia to work on a project. And I was a junior in college maybe, and I had started working with this organization called Egg Bok Mission maybe like 6 months prior, and then was able to actually go and work on this business plan that we had for them creating a sustainable source of revenue, which has come to fruition in Cambodia itself. And I remember like being prepped for the trip, and you know, as I was going, I actually had braids at that time too, and the woman who was leading the trip was like, people are going to ask you about them, like they don't really see Black Americans here, so just like be prepared and don't be offended. And sure enough, that happened, and people had questions. They wanted to touch my hair. And it was like just such a wild experience for me because, I see Black women all the time in my phone, on the computer, like, they're everywhere when I call home. Black people are on the other side of the phone too. So I hadn't really realized that the concept of a Black American woman just isn't that common in certain areas of the world. And so now I laugh when people are like, "Are you Beyonce?" Because it's like, what? Maybe I could be. I don't get anything like her, but if you want me to be sure, and I'm still kind of tall. So that is a bit different for folks as well. And my accent is distinctly American, I guess, more than it is anything else. So that can be surprising too. But I think that, I learned along the way that those experiences really expanded my mind and helped me continue to grow. And that was an important part of wellness too. It's just like continuing to expand who I am as a person and shift the way that I see the world.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with us today, Kira. It was really a joy having you. And thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of So-Called Oreos Podcast. Please follow us on all social media at So-Called Oreos, and you can email us at socalledoreos@gmail.com. Also, fill out our survey. It's on all our social media, especially our new listeners. We really want you guys to fill out the survey so we know what we can bring to you, what content you enjoy, and how we can make this podcast more enjoyable. And you can listen to us on all podcast platforms like SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play. And please, please, please remember to help us out by liking the podcast, rating it, subscribing, leaving an awesome review. And until next time, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.